So next up, I think we're going to tackle the button pop-up. So if we take a look at the Boolean loudness meter, you'll see this kind of nice pop-up window here. And this, you might think, would be nice and easy with a combo box. But because we want to make this very similar, if not identical, we really want to follow the set pattern. And that is when you hover over the button and have the arrow. That's pretty easy. We'll do that probably after this. But it's deceivingly complicated to do this part. So for one, it expands outwards and up, which we can do with an animation. And then two, you have configurable drop downs like this. So it's a bit more than what I would call a combo box. It's kind of its own custom control almost. So a combo box would normally have one option, whereas this has like expandable headers. The other thing as well is it expands upwards and not based on where it is on the screen. So if we go to the bottom of the screen and click it, it still expands up. So, and I think when you resize, this has also got glitches in the Boolean loudness meter itself that when you resize, this goes under the controls. So we'll make sure we don't have that bug. We don't want to add bugs to ours. But basically this kind of pop-up is something that's going to be semi-difficult to do. So let's tackle that first. We'll just make this background white for now so we can actually see what we're doing there. And we'll do that by just making the background here. So background white fixes this down here. The preview as well as set wrong needs to be 1048 and 645. 1048, 645. There we go. And now we've got white down here. So the way I'm going to tackle this is I'm basically going to have the button just be a button that you click. So this can stay a button. We'll add the little arrow that does its thing. And when we click the button, we want to show another control that's simply on top of this entire grid. So let's just go to the main grid, which is this grid here, which houses basically everything in this sort of window. So it's pretty much the master grid. So because opening a control where this button is located in this UI is going to be directly involving querying this UI's code, and it's very specific to this XAML and the way Avalonia is drawing the code, I don't think the positional code that gets a pop-up appearing by the button is of any concern of the view model. So I'm going to leave this one out of the view model. You're free to put it where you like, and we could make it work in the view model, but we'd have to have calls back from the view model to the view, which is something you don't really want to do. The view model wants to stay as clean from the actual view itself and have no concern with it as possible. So we'd have to work away with interfaces and callbacks to do things like, get dedicated button position and set button position, all kinds of things you don't really need to do. So in order to position a new control, we're just going to do it in this actual class. And to do that, we need to name a few things. So we'll name this main grid so we can access it in the code behind here. And the button currently says stereo. And you hover over, you can see it says change the channel configuration. So that's channel configuration button. So what we'll do here, where it says stereo, we will set the name here to channel configuration button, because we will need to get some info off this button in the background as well. We're going to want a command when we actually click that button. So if we just jump into here, we will need a few things. So we'll need a Boolean for channel configuration list is open, something like that. Set it to false, and this will indicate to the view model whether the list is open. So I feel that does belong in the view model. We'll need a command as well, which we haven't done yet, but you just add a method. We're not going to return anything, and we'll call this channel configuration button pressed. And in fact, we don't even need to have an open close brace. All we're going to do every time we click the button is invert the channel configuration is open Boolean. And I always do that with my little duck face. So using a little bit of Boolean logic, this is a way to just simply flip a Boolean. I've always done that. There's many ways to invert a boolean. This is my preferred way, so that will just toggle this boolean going true to false every time we click it. And for this, we just set it as a relay command. That will now make a new command called channel configuration button pressed command. So the properties go uppercase in the first letter. The relay commands go with an extension at the end called command. That should be all we need for the view model. Back to the button, we can go to command, do binding, and we should find that new channel configuration button pressed command. So every time we click the button, that will run and toggle the button. And just to quickly see that, I guess we could, let's say, make this YouTube button is visible, bound to the channel configuration is open, just for a quick visual that this is working. And you can see there now, when we click this button, we toggle on and off what will become the list opening and closing. Let's just remove that binding. Next, we want to get some, doesn't really matter what it is, but we'll get some stack panel or something, or a border or anything we want in there to show where we're going to end up putting that new menu. So just some shape, just like a rectangle to represent this, I guess, so we can check the positions right. So with that, we can chuck it in the main grid, which we could probably comment now as well. And then here, this can be the channel configuration pop-up. And this is going to be, let's just do a border. And it wants to span all the rows. So it can basically take up room over everything. We'll just do a background of red a minute just to show it. And then the trick now to get this to actually show over everything is just to put it on a z-index above the view. So you can see now it's above everything. We just did say opacity is 0.5 just so you can see. We now have a pop-up that takes up the whole view and covers everything. So to prevent that from just being fully taken up, let's just put, say, a label inside with some content of test. Then we'll make the border have a horizontal alignment of left and a vertical alignment of bottom. And now you can see it's gone to the very bottom corner. And what we need to do now is get this menu, in a sense, that will be the pop-up, into the corner of this button. And this is where the code behind in the specific view is going to come in. What we want to do is get the position of this button every time the window renders itself. So every time you change the size of the window, it will call render. So every time we hit a render command, we want to then get the button position of this, which is a named button now, and set the margin of this one. So if we were to say set a margin of left of, I don't know, 15 and then a bottom of 15, you can see we can set something like this. So all we need to do is find out the position of this button relative to the main grid. That's why we've named the main grid. So the X and Y position of this stereo button, and then we can subtract its height, and we can use the left position and the bottom position of the stereo button to set the margin of this border. And that will force the pop-up menu to appear wherever this button is placed. So to do that, we will also need to name this border as well, so we can access this. And this can be the channel configuration pop-up. So if we go to the code behind of the view now, if we do override render, and then let's keep the base render command. And as well as that now, in fact, let's also put some private members in here first. Private members. And we'll do a control, I think is a low enough visual object that matches all of them. And we'll call it the channel config pop-up. we'll have the main grid, and we'll have, do the other way around, have the channel config button. So they're the three things we'll need. We can grab them at the start instead of doing that every time we render, which would be inefficient. Once the view is made, we can just do this.find control. We only care about, say, it being in a control. We don't need any more info of the specific type of control because we only want to get the bounds and things. The control is expecting the name of the control, which is what we named in here, for example. So we'll copy that, go back, and if we do this, we will get the control. So this one is the channel config button. And this is a potential fail. This is a nullable. It might not find this and it will just return null. So we don't really want to continue if it's null. We can't do much with that. So we'll do double question mark, and if it is null, we'll throw a new exception. And that exception can say cannot find channel configuration button by name. That will ensure that this will always be something, or it will crash. Copy that again. We'll do the channel configuration pop-up. We will, oh, that's actually what we use there, sorry. So we'll use that still. We need the channel configuration button. So that one needs to change to button. That one's already pop-up. And this one was, I believe, main grid we called it. Let's double check. Yeah, main grid. And with that, let's just update the crashes. If it does crash, that will be pop-up, and this will be main grid. So these three will run when the view starts and capture an instance of them, so we can now access them in this render call. And in the render call now, what we need to do is set, ultimately, we want to set the pop-ups margin. So we'll get the pop-up, do the margin. That needs to be a new thickness. And the thickness is expecting, say, left, top, right, and bottom. So we'll do left will be a value we want. So let's just for now do left, top, right, bottom like this. So we want to set the thickness every time. We want to set the margin every time the view is re-rendered because of a size change. So if we do this, you can see we hit here now. Then you can drag this window around. It doesn't fire off renders every time you're doing things. You know, you click around. It's literally when you resize. So if we go to click and drag, you can see it jumps in here and attempts to re-render. So it's only going to run when we are resizing the view, which is what we want. And before we can set that, we need to figure out the position of this button relative to the main grid. So we need to get the main grid's height, and then we need to get this button's bounding box, but relative to the grid, basically. So we need to know if this top corner of this button here is inside the main grid, what is this position? So it would be 20 pixels from the left or something like that. And from the top of the grid, all the way up here, it would be about 600 or so pixels down. So we're after like a left value of, 20 by 600. If we get the bounds or the position or the XY of this button at the moment, it's relative to its container, which is this row. So we need to translate the position relative to the main grid. So we'll do that with position equals, and if we use the button itself, there's a function on here called translate point. And what this will do is take a point, any point we like, and translate it relative to another visual element. So if we were to pass in the button's bounds and get, say, top left, it would translate the point at the top left relative to the visual of, say, the main grid. So we pass in the main grid here. And we'll end up with a position that relates to the main grid's position. Now, we don't want top left because any values in here, if we apply a point with, say, 10 pixels or 10 points on the button's position, and then we translate it to the main grid, that 10 will no longer be a 10 position inside the button. It will be expanded to as if you were in the main grid. So it's a little bit complicated to explain, but simply pass in a new point, so a 0, 0 point. And what that will do is translate this top left corner of the button into an actual position if we were to set something inside the main grid at that exact point. So with that position then, we've got another null check here. So we need to make sure we can get that point, and if not, throw another exception. And similar message, cannot get translate point from configuration button. So it will crash if it fails there. If we've got the position now, all we need to do is set the left to position.x. And the bottom, let's just set to position.y. And let's take a look at what that does. And you can see there, cannot get translate from point. And if you hover over it, it's because main grid is null. And that's because here I didn't set main grid. So we've known that that now works at least. Try again. And there we go. So now you can see the controls ended up all the way up here. And the reason for that will be we've set a margin on the bottom, so this bottom margin, as the Y position. So let's just see what that position is. Let's just resize. And the position you can see is 20 on the left and 593 on the Y. So what that correctly relates to is it's saying this button here is 23 points over from the left and 590 odd points down, which is exactly what we want. So we've got this position here, but what we've done is added a margin from the bottom here all the way up here. So we've effectively done the opposite. We've flipped it round. We want to either align to the top and do a margin top down, which we don't want to do, and instead we want to go from the bottom up. So to flip that around, all we need to do is take the main grid's bounding area, get its height, and minus the position off the bottom, so that we flipped that around. And you can see now it's landed exactly on the top of the button, which is almost where we want. But if you remember here, when you open it, it covers the button, which, to be honest, I'm not sure whether you want that because it's not obvious that you can close the button by clicking away. But I would probably actually leave it at the top. But for keeping it the same, we need to just nudge this down further. So to do that, as well as taking off the position, you just then also take off the actual button's own height as well. That will then nudge it further down because the margin is even less. And you can see now we end up at the very bottom corner of that button. If the code's working, all we should have to do to now reposition and bind this to another button is to just change what control we put that name on. Let's also check the important thing. When you move around, that red now is locked in position with the button. So let's just test it's still working, and let's literally just move this name off of the button there, and let's just place it on, I don't know, say this true peak 7 decibels item. So we'll place it on this large label control. And that's a more complicated control as well. It's a custom control, and let's see if it still works. And there you go. It's now bound to the bottom left of this control here. And it might not look like it's the bottom left, but if you imagine these buttons here, they do automatically span the full width of the row. So this line here will indicate where this button actually is. So the control itself is this wide, and it comes down to there. And the bottom of this True Peak Max is here as well. So that is the bottom left corner of that control. We'll do it once more for, say, the Avalonia loudness meter title. And then if that works, we're pretty confident this is good to use. So let's pick this main tile here. And you can also see it does update here. If we just simply build, your preview will actually update. And you don't even need to run the application. You can see it's now jumped to here. And the label's there. If we were to put background on the label, for example, you can see it is the bottom corner of the label. And the label's got that extra area because of padding. So that's exactly what we want this code to do, is take this named control and bind its position to another control. We could obviously improve that if we were to use it more and make a kind of helper class or some kind of attached property where you could simply pass in on a control attached to and then the name of another control and then sort of top left, bottom right, and you could make it a nice cool control to quickly tag and jump things. But for now, we just want to start here, which is key. And we're only using it on this button for now. So I'm sure when we come to use like this one, for example, you can see that appears on the left there, but because it's full width, it kind of limits itself to the height of the window. So it'll be interesting to see what it does when it's full. And when it's finally long enough, it does actually go to the bottom of the button. So it acts the same as this, but if it's too large, then it just becomes a scrollable panel. So we'll bear that in mind when we come to do it. So it looks like we will use it for this other button, and then we'll probably make it into a kind of, instead of it just being generic like this and some code behind like this, we'll turn it into some kind of helper class. Right, so we have the constructor, we have the render call, and we get the position. So this is get relative position of button in relation to main grid. Set margin of pop-up so it appears bottom left of button. So that's doing its job. We now have the position of a element that can be anything, and at the minute that is just a border. So let's get rid of the opacity, the Z index stays, the row stays. So what we want to do next is animate this pop-up every time we click this button. We've already got the button doing something, so we can bind to a property. But now we need to scale this pop-up to a size. We can figure that size out later as well. We can set it to a specific height. And the way we want to animate this is we're going to animate the width and height and simply start at 0 and just expand outwards. So it will naturally just expand out and upwards. And hopefully give us this kind of, this pop-up that you see here. So that's the idea. The only way you can do them is with styles. So if we just go into the styles here and make a new style, and the selector this time will be a border currently, and we'll do it with a class of, don't really know what's it specific to. I guess it is specific to this channel pop-up, so we'll call it channel. And then inside there, we will want a setter. We have to set the properties that we want to animate. If they're not set by default, then they won't animate. So we'll just set the width and the height to 0 by default. And then we also need to set the transitions, I think it is. Yep, transitions. They're the things we want to animate. Width and height are double values, so it'll be a double transition on the property width. And we'll have the duration, how long it's going to take, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0.3 seconds, something like that. Do the same for height. That should get us a width and a height that animate. And it doesn't like that. What have I done wrong? It has to go inside another object called transitions, I think it is. That's the animation done for that. Right, what do we want to do next? So if we want to test that, we can just add a class to this now. So we do classes equals channel. That should disappear. Yep, so you can see it's gone there. And now to bind to classes, you can't just bind to this classes object, but there is a way to bind to classes. If you want permanent ones, just type classes, and this is the classes that will be on all the time. And then what we want is a way to toggle an extra class that says maybe open, so that we can bind another selector to animate the width and height. So for that, if we do classes and then just do dot, and now we can name a value, and this will become a class name. So we do classes.open, and this literally is whatever you want to type. You can type whatever you like. So if we do classes.open equals, it will now expect if I do a binding to the, what was it called? Configuration. list as open, if I bind to that property, whenever this is true, which is when you click the button, it will add the class open to this button. So to test that then, if we do another style selector, copy and paste that one, and we just do border.channel.open, which means it's got both classes on, and we set the width to, say, 300 and the height to 800. We don't need the transitions anymore. That's set on the main one. That will mean then, whenever we get a class of open added, the width and height should change and it should animate. So if I've written all that right, this should already animate. And there we go, and that's a little bit high, it's got a bit overkill. And then we need to add a way to close it after. So we did height of, say, 600, something like that. We now have a pop-up that like nicely animates, and that's got a ramp up curve on the animation. It's not linear, and I think Avalonia does animation curves. I'm pretty sure it does, like ease in and ease out kind of animations. I'm very sure it does. So see, that's very linear. It's also a little bit slow. So let's change the time to 0.2. And I'm sure, there you go, easing. This will be something like ease in and ease out. I don't know what it is. There we go. So just the name of it. So bounce ease in. And has it got a list of all the easings? Yes, it has. So we'll want probably bounce ease in and out. Maybe. Let's see. Easing, bounce ease in and out. Let's see if that works. And it just gives it that nice curve. I've got a feeling bounce is literally going to bounce. I don't think this is the right one, but I didn't seem to do anything. Okay, let's slow it down so we can actually see the animation. But that didn't appear to bounce in any way. Oh, it is. It's like a ugly bounce. We don't want that. We just want a elastic ease in and out. I reckon that's the one we want. You have to basically ramp in fast and slow down at the end. So a slow ramp in, then fast, then a slow out. That's also not what I want. I just want the basic, oh, there you go, sine, yeah, because it's going to be a sine wave. Let's try again. There you go. So it's not very good. It's not very exaggerated, but let's keep trying. I think on the original, it only slows the gradual increase and then speeds up like a ramp up. We've got it doing it start and finish. That's nice. I like that one. Quadratic. So we could do quadratic ease in, and then it will only ease the growth and not stop. It will just go straight to the finish, which I think is what we're seeing on the other one. That's it. I think that's what we're seeing, just faster. So I think it's like 0.17, something like that. But that little bit of animation really helps with the visual appeal, I think. There we go. It's even faster than that, I think, but yeah, I'm happy with that. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough, and we can always play with these minute details after. So that's the animation done. I think what we want to do once that's open as well, because I'm pretty certain once that's open, anywhere you click kind of closes down. So it doesn't matter where you click once that menu's open. If you don't click an item here and you click anywhere else, it closes. So what we'll do for that, that's pretty easy to do. We'll just do another item here. So we'll do a border. And just for visual at the minute, let's just do a background of red, Z index of 1, do a row span of 3. I don't get why this is moaning here. Missing grid.row setter for non-first child. Oh, okay, so it's just complaining that we should be setting them, even though it row spans everything. So we'll explicitly set the rows. There we go. So we span over everything like we did here, and then change this Z index to 2. So this menu sits on top. Let's change this to blue, say. And what you will see then is if the menu was visible, you would actually see it over now. So this blue is going to be consuming everything. So instead of that now, if we just set it to nothing, you can probably set the background purposely to transparent as well, so that you know explicitly it never gets overridden. We now have a transparent overlay that will take all the click events. And border doesn't have a click event directly, but you can do pointer pressed. And then for that, we can just quickly run the command on the view model. And I don't know whether we can inline these. Let's just try this first. We can just do main view model, which is the data context, dot button pressed. And we can just execute the request. That for now will give us, when we click on it, which should be this transparent background that's, I presume, clickable while it's transparent. If not, we might have to set a slight overlay or do some trickery. And there you go. So anywhere we click now, it's hitting that hidden background. So that works for now. And then all we need to do is literally show this border only when so is visible binding to when it is open. So it's visible when it's open and it's invisible when it's not. So this now will only show up when the menu is actually visible. So now if we click, we get nothing. We have all the hovers. We click the button to open, and now you click anywhere else and it goes away. So we've now simulated a similar behavior, and we've still maintained clickability in here, but you can click out. So that's the kind of mechanism that works for one button, and we're free to now just do whatever we like inside of this pop-up. So let's just do pop-up channel configuration pop-up closer. I think we should consider making this kind of setup, this pop-up closer, the configuration, all the names, all this code behind, into some kind of helper class so that it can be reused when we come to do this button, for example, where it has the same things. You need a master area you want to overlay your closer. You want an element that you want to position next to another element, and one element's a button and the other's the content that gets closed. They're all relative things we could abstract out to a kind of helper class or system. And we just need to think of how we probably want to do that, where all this code and all this code get nicely cleaned up into just the key pieces of information we need, which is just literally potentially in the constructor here, just the name of the button, the name of the pop-up, and the name of the parent. And then from that, it will hook into render, it will get the position of those, it will do this binding here to the pop-up instead of doing it here. You know, handle all that nicer. But for now, we have what we need, which is the actual functionality. So you can see how much more complicated that is than it first looks to just be able to do a click and get a nice pop-up appearing. And you can also see when you click away, it animates backwards out as well. So it works really well, but now we just need to improve on it for reusability. So that's it for this one, guys. I'll catch you in the next.